Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar on inclusive education. And with me I've got Clark Burt, and he's going to take us through the session this afternoon. So Clark, it's going to be an interesting webinar.
Yeah, it is. I think this is really great stuff that I think honestly every teacher needs to know about. How to actually adjust and modify the curriculum to meet the individualized and the personalized needs of your students.
So we've got we've got a framework we're going to go through today.
Absolutely. So what we're going to quickly go through is to go through just briefly the digital technologies curriculum. And then I'm going to show you my approach into how you then look at the curriculum and then look at how you can adjust it for students who are at different abilities. And then what we're going to talk about, we're going to take you through some examples. And then we're going to show you a couple of frameworks, including a Universal Design for Learning, UDL, which is some great sort of strategies and approaches that you can use in your lesson planning, both for just individuals and for actually whole group lessons as well. And then of course we're going to wrap it up today with just a bit about assessment and then how the ongoing adjustments.
So tell us a bit about your background before we get started.
A bit about me. Well, currently, I teach at Ashwood School in Victoria. Ashwood School is a school for students with mild intellectual disabilities. They have an IQ, mild intellectual disabilities, an IQ between 50 to 70. If you know Forrest Gump in the movie, he had an IQ in the movie of 69. So that is sort of the high range for mild intellectual disabilities. I'm also doing a part-time PhD at the University of Melbourne. My PhD research is in using ICT for vocabulary instruction for students with intellectual disabilities. But I've also tutored and lectured as well. I'm on the Australian Association of Special Education Committee of the Victorian chapter. And I have my own website and Twitter. And
so you know your stuff.
Yeah, well, I've been doing this for a while. I've been here in Australia for 12 years. You may have noticed the accent. I'm actually originally from the States, but 12 years here and about 8 years in special education, but actually teaching all up I did the math, about 14 years since I started teaching way back when.
So well, hopefully the teachers who are basically in the same boat now trying to adjust their curriculum can listen to some of your strategies and get a lot out of it. So let's have a look at where some of our people are at the moment who've registered by the location. We do have some people again in New Zealand, so g'day out there. Northern Territory, WA.
Yes, looks great. I think, is there anyone here from Darwin? That's probably one of the few places
Pretty sure
I haven't been.
Sue Carter might be on the line. She's often from, well, she's from Northern Territory. So g'day, Sue Carter.
Yeah, that's like the only one of the few places from Australia I haven't visited yet.
Okay, there you go.
Sure. Can't wait.
We might just find out a bit more about our audience and run a little poll, just to see what role you have or what you play in the schools, whether you're a primary teacher, secondary.
Are you a digital technologies teacher, or are you, because I'm a special education teacher in a special school, I do much more of a general curriculum, but I incorporate a lot of ICT and Digitech into my stuff. So just more curious about, who's here with us.
So we'll run that poll now and give you a few seconds just to tell us a bit about whether, you are a special ed teacher or whatever.
And we should mention as well that we will have a PDF version of the slides, and at the end we will have a nice little handout that you can distribute to your colleagues.
So I think we're going to close up the poll there, just about 90%. So Michelle, you can just tell us what.
Got 35% primary, 18% secondary and special ed, and specialist IT digital teaching, and 12% leadership.
Okay, so it's a bit of a smattering there. So what we're anticipating. What we're going to do now is just to get a little bit of information from our audience, just to see in terms of, we're going to run a Padlet. And in the chat section, Michelle's going to put in the link for that Padlet, a bit.ly link. And what we're going to do is ask you what are challenges that you face with the students learning, what kind of challenges they face, strategies that you might have used, and then what about some other guidance, so Clark can then sort of get a sense of the types of challenges students have, then strategies you might have already utilized.
And what are you looking to get out of this session as well? We'll certainly do our best to try to answer some of your questions.
So I'll flip over there while you're talking. I'll just flip over to our Padlet.
And yes, like I said, if there's anything else that we didn't get a chance to cover today, you can easily contact me again, I think through the website.
So with the following instructions,
Yes.
there's a challenge there. So truly being engaged. So how would you sort of?
Engagement is certainly an issue. For example, I teach students who, teenagers, but they are at an academic level of sort of grade 2, grade 3, where, and the frustrating thing for me as a teacher is a lot of the materials to teach basic reading, they aren't really designed for teenagers. They're designed with, puppies and kittens and clowns and such.
Sure.
So trying to get that, really engagement to try to get students, really to buy in, it is certainly a challenge. But I think hopefully we'll address those things because I do have a few strategies when it comes to talk about personalization.
Yeah. So we won't answer the questions now, but we'll basically, at least we're aware of some of these things. So distractions coming up a bit more. I'll just go and have a look at what else we've got here.
Self-regulation is certainly an interesting one. I think there's something called executive functioning, which is all those skills that we have in our brain through organization, time management, keeping a diary, doing all these things. And that is something that I think actually a lot of students just struggle with, especially as they transition from primary into secondary school and a lot of things change. But at the same time, knowing the students and as you'll see a bit later where we talk about some ways to approach lesson planning, hopefully I can give you some sort of helps as to that you're actually making the goals of the lesson and where the beginning, middle, and the end a bit more explicit, that can help with regulation.
Yeah, it's great to see those suggestions coming up, so thanks for doing that. We've also got, we'll just go over the strategies, some of the things that people have used. So appealing to things that interest students, that's always a very useful one. Modifying tasks, simplifying the words and description of questions. That's
really handy. Sort of making it, making definitions that's really friendly definitions is sort of what I call them. Making things that are accessible to the students in ways that they understand.
And getting feedback from other staff about some other strategies that might work. So people who might have more experience, for example, if you're a younger teacher in the school or
and certainly if there's a student or a couple students in particular that you're just sort of not sure how to approach it, talk to their other teachers because you are likely not alone, and hopefully they maybe have some great ideas and suggestions as well.
So obviously today we'll give advice on strategies. That's number one with some actual examples.
We have some actual examples. That's going to be great.
A1, so that's good. I think we've got quite a bit there, and we might return back to that later on. So what I thought we would do if we just go straight into, you were talking about your starting point with the Australian curriculum and what you do. So let's just take, how about we just
keep writing, feel free, but we're gonna move ahead and we're gonna bring up the Australian curriculum website now, and specifically we're here at the Digital Technologies curriculum. And this is my process. This is sort of what I do when I have a student in front of me and I need to modify the curriculum, because there's still, despite the fact that we do have to adjust the curriculum, we do have legal requirements to make sure that all students access the curriculum in ways that they can. And so what I have is I have a fictitious example of I have a year 7 student who I want to teach the digital technologies curriculum to, who I've said that they're academically about at the foundation level. And so this is how I would approach the curriculum. Well, first, if I'm teaching someone who is, their typically developing peers, if they're in grade year 7 and their typically developing peers are in year 7, then this student, whatever academic level that they're at, has the right to be taught the year 7 topics as well. And so very first thing you need to do is to know, well, what are other students learning, at that year level.
So maybe let's take something like the digital systems, for example.
Perfect. So I'm looking at these content descriptions and I see this first, digital technologies, knowledge and understanding, investigate how data is transmitted and secured in wired, wireless, and mobile networks, etc. And so I'm going to look at that and think, well, and this is one of the real things that concerns with the digital technologies curriculum that for some of our students, abstract thinking is quite difficult for them. You know, they're great with the concrete facts or the tangible things that they can feel and touch, but when it comes to bigger abstract concepts, you know, they really struggle with. And unfortunately, as you get in, you know, to the higher years in the digital technology curriculum, it's a lot of complex, it's a lot of abstract thinking, which is great. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the, you know, 21st century skills. But, you know, when you look at this, you know, data is transmitted, secured in wireless mobile networks, well, that can be quite an abstract thing to someone who, you know, who academically is more at a foundation level. So then what I would do is, keeping this up, I am now going to also open up the foundation to year 2 curriculum as well. So I have their age curriculum, and then I have the curriculum that I believe that they're academically at, and I'm going to compare them. So I see on the left that, you know, if they're at someone at the foundation academic level, their goal is to recognize and explore digital systems for a purpose. And then, you know, at the right side, well, then that's what, you know, their typically developing peers would be working. And my goal as a teacher is to try to marry them together. Now, ideally, we would love to teach them as much of the year 7 curriculum as possible. Yeah. But, you know, we know that, well, we will have to go and adjust some of these things because it may not be realistic to try and teach switches and bridges and routers and all those things that we may need to get a bit more simpler of, okay, what's in front of the student? What's tangible now? They can understand a desktop, they can understand a printer, they can understand logging in or connecting to the internet. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through sort of this, and then how can we take this idea of bridging these two contents together? Yeah.
So basically what you're saying was, you're looking at the curriculum first, and you know, from that you're trying to say, identifying with the students, what are their challenges, and then how do we try and work through a process that we can
exactly. And so that process, we're going to give you a few different examples now. Let's go back to our slides and talk about, here's a visual model of, this is exactly what I was talking about before. The digital technologies curriculum is, again, it's actually a wonderful curriculum because at the turn of the century, as you sort of know, there was this big push for, we need a curriculum that sort of meets this new, you know, we don't know what jobs will be available in 20 years, and we need 21st century thinking and all this great stuff. It is not just about coding. You know, people think, you know, digital technologies coding. It's a lot more than that. It's about, you know, problem solving and creating solutions using technology. The unfortunate thing about that is then, well, some of that is quite high-level abstract thinking. So we as teachers need to be able to sort of adjust that curriculum so that our students in our classroom can work with it and still be a part of it. So again, we looked at the curriculum. We know what, you know, the student at the age level is expected to be learning, but we also know that at their academic level, what they more likely are going to be able to work with, and we need to make an adjustment. So an adjustment is a measure or action, you know, used to modify the curriculum so that the student can access the curriculum as much as within their ability level, and then participate along with the other students. And of course, it takes into account, you know, the student's individual needs and the needs of the school and what the school has available in terms of resources and equipment. And I also want to say that when we're talking about adjustments and we're talking about students with special needs, a quick thing to know is that historically, when we've talked about students with additional needs or special needs, it's been a medical model. It's been a deficit model where we've talked about the issues that they have or the problems that they face or what they can't do. And there's been a real change into now talking about the abilities model. In other words, focusing on, well, what can they do? What are they able to do? And so when you look at actually adjusting the curriculum, you know, it's important to look at the student and think, okay, what is the student capable of, and how can I use that as part of teaching these adjustments? So this is a nice little visual diagram from Queensland about actually some of the things that I talked about already about making adjustments to the curriculum. Now, I think I can leave it to you to sort of go through this more. But what I will say about this is another thing as well is if you're really getting stuck with adapting the curriculum, for example, let's say the curriculum, wants you to teach something that, that a particular student could really not, could not really achieve. You are absolutely allowed to then incorporate other concepts into that curriculum, including cross-curricular priorities, and also from just the general curriculum as well. So much more ICT-based goals as well. So it's the goal is, the expectation as you as a teacher is to try to teach the expected curriculum, but you ultimately know the child, and you know what's best for them and what's going to ultimately at least allow them to work with the curriculum and be successful students. So we talked about this. We talked about about that you are legally expected to teach the curriculum, but how you teach the curriculum and how you adjust it is up to your own interpretation. But what you cannot do is you cannot just say, okay, well, they can't get the year 7 stuff, so we'll just put them on an iPad or something. No, they still have the legal right to access parts of the curriculum, even if it means you have to modify it and you have to bring in assistive technologies, or you need to use Braille instead of computer screens, but they do have that right. But it is, again, you, the teacher, are in the best position to know, okay, this is where they're at developmentally and academically, and how you're going to modify the curriculum for them. So this is actually what we went through on the website already, but so I feel like I'm repeating myself a bit, but yep. So start at their age, and then look at their developmental level, and then try to sort of, again, I say sort of marry the two together, or try to meet as much of their age level curriculum as possible, but with the understanding that in some instances and for some things that you will have to really scale it down to their developmental level. And so my example of marrying of the year 9 digital systems example that I just did in the previous slide that we went through pretty quickly, and foundational example is I came up with a lesson, how do we secure our school computers? How do we log into them? How do we physically, lock them in a cabinet, sort of things? What's a password? Why do we have it? And those are things that, that's a great example of something that, does meet the need of the year 9 about the role of hardware and software and controlling data. It does meet the need of, it does also meet foundational requirements of digital systems for a purpose. And it also, tangibly, it's something that they need to know, something that's important, and something that they'll have to,
a life skill as well.
Deal with as a life skill. So personally, I really try and create lessons that meet the needs of the curriculum, and it's something that will help them in the future as well.
So part of that process is you really need to understand the curriculum and what the curriculum's asking of you. You absolutely need to know the curriculum, both in terms of the developmental age, but all their typical the age of their typical peers, but also about their developmental age. And for some students, it could actually be pre-foundation. Now here in Victoria, we have a program called the Abilities-Based Learning and Education Support, the ABLES program, which actually looks at the curriculum. It's called Working Towards Curriculum, levels A, B, C, and D, which are pre-foundational. It's working towards foundational level, because for some teachers, they may see the foundational curriculum is even still too tough, is still something that their students are going to struggle with. And more states are actually rolling out ABLES and taking a part of ABLES. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it, except the fact that you may want to look into this program, because it's an assessment program that helps you as a teacher understand developmentally where that child might be. So they're on the handout. So the handout's, I think, available. They can download it.
Yeah. If not now, at the end. But yeah, just so that you know that if you look at the foundation level and already that's, think, oh, I'm not sure if that's even, too high for the student, that, you can go lower, and there are resources available to do that. So for example, as I talked about these 4 levels, now I don't expect you to know or read all this, but I show this because I think it gives you a great example of how you can even break up, if foundation level is too high, in the sense that, you know, you may have students, if you work at, if you have students who has a severe developmental disability, they may be able, you know, or they may be nonverbal, they may be able to only make a choice from two options.
Mm-hmm.
They may be able to be a yes or no, this one or that one. And, you know, or they may not be able to communicate, or if they can communicate, it's very simple. Maybe they can match objects, or maybe that they can do a simple verbal prompt. Moving up to level C in the ableism example actually is they can work a bit more independently, and they can respond to some clear instructions. And, you know, they can participate, they can kind of sort of work with others, but not too well. Whereas sort of what we call level D, just below level F, is they're actually able to do some social cooperation. They're actually able to work with peers to do some work. And I think that's an important thing for you to also consider with your students and your lesson planning is this something that I need to teach one-on-one to the student? Or is this something that the student, you know, will learn by themselves? Is this something that the student, you know, we're going to have to do, we can do it with a peer, but possibly a more able-bodied peer?
I mean, the good thing about this resource is that it's based on digital technologies, or there's other learning areas, but digital technologies is pulled apart, and that gives you a good sense of what, how to break it down.
So if you have access to this, or you want to look at the Victorian curriculum online, the digital technologies actually is broken out. So it'll actually say level A digital technologies, and it'll say level A, it'll be, you know, they can choose a favorite picture from two, you know, from two choices.
So it is, even if you're not in Victoria, it's still quite useful.
You can look at it, just to see for your plan.
And I know that some of the other states and territories might be looking at
South Australia, Western Australia.
Yeah. So let's get into another, people want a practical example. I think it's, you know, practical examples sort of explain things
absolutely
very well. So how about this Unifix block?
Yes, and so this example is not necessarily taking it from the stance of, oh, we're going to look at curriculum and is this a foundation? We're going to make this a foundation task, but just how can we, knowing that a student's doing an example like this, will need to understand symbols and codings and sequencing. How can we go and modify something that maybe was written for a higher ability that now, you know, maybe suits some of the students in my class, but how can I then adjust it to meet some students who maybe struggle a bit more with these abstract concepts? Because if you see the example color key and the example code, that's abstract, you know. You know, a concrete thing is a tangible block, a Unifix block in front of you. Abstract is something that's written on a piece of paper.
So the task is, we've got, say, for the class, just the basic task is to have 20 blocks, make a model, and then you have to code that model or code that sequence so that someone else can follow your sequence and create that model. And lo and behold, when you look at each other's model, it should be the same.
Yes.
So obviously 20 blocks is quite a lot if you've got a student who's got some challenges for learning. So what's some adjustments?
Yeah, so some adjustments. You certainly think about, well, where is the student going to start with that task? And so you can start by actually giving examples out already, showing them sort of a model work. For example, you know, and just this is an example with 7 colors, and ask them to actually write out a code, B for blue. I intentionally put 2 green together because as a teacher, you want to know their thinking. You want to know, did they write 2 Gs because that's 2 blocks, or did they think that was just 1 green? For example, you could also, you know, if they do, you know, great with the codes, you can give them a longer blocks, or you can, even if that's even the letter is maybe an issue for them, or they're even struggling with that, say, okay, just actually copy it down. Here's some colored pencils, and just actually copy the pattern. And it can start as simple as 5 blocks in 2 colors, blue, red, blue, red, blue, you know, and then you can work it up more. And this is great because you as the teacher will sort of, you know the student, so you will know, okay, I think that they can probably start with the 3rd example and they can convert that into, you know, the letters and this, but this student, no, why don't we just start with the coloring? And the other great thing about this is that if they start at one point, they're starting in the middle and then they're struggling with converting the yellow to a Y, or, you can always, okay, let's step back and let's only do a smaller one.
Yeah. I think one of the things too with this, it goes to the other extreme. You can sort of get a 3D model and you can make it for a gifted gifted student. So
yes, well, and also again, if you want, we do use these are paper examples, but of course you could also just put the Unifix blocks, actually in front of them and have them do it, have them actually copy down and repeat the pattern with their own set of Unifix blocks. So this is just an example of a lesson that is about sequencing. It's about coding. It meets the expectations of the digital technologies curriculum, but that can be adjusted to meet a variety of needs in your classroom.
Excellent. So just to sort of sum up on some of those adjustments that were made, so that we saw there was a level of difficulty. We could sort of adjust
how many blocks, how many colors.
Yeah, the size of the task, so sort of pretty much the same thing.
Because then, if you want to do a second layer or 3D models, yes, absolutely.
Now the timing, so there might have been a student who was struggling with fitting it into the time that was normally allotted. Yeah,
and then that's where then, okay, can I reduce the task or make it a bit simpler? And then what I like to do is, and I'm actually going to talk about this later, is I try and go for easier tasks, and then I have the extension tasks ready to go. And something like this is like, okay, great, now I want you to do that, but 2D, or give it to a friend to do. And level of support, this is again an example of where if you have a student who is a bit more capable at this, and you have a student who isn't, but that student is good with working with others, that you can go and pair them together, and then they can sort of teach each other and share their models.
And I suppose that student output, that basically if you're reading someone else's code, so that might be, you might need some support to do that in some.
Absolutely, and that's where you can again just try it with single colors, or I know part of that code example you saw had the right arrow to go, it gets down, but then what if it's the blocks now go downwards? What's the down arrow mean? So the student could be fine with, okay, I get the letter B and then a right arrow, then the letter Y and then the right arrow, but then okay, wait, they see the down arrow and then they get all confused.
So now the setting, is that something where, let's say if the student's having difficulty concentration wise, is that something that we can bring into it, or is that?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. There's a variety of things. And again, I know I have students, I've dealt with students who are, a great example is who have OCD. And you can't use the green blocks, or no, this is the pattern I want to make. And so you can do that by the great thing about something like this is you can do it in a variety of settings. You can do it with a variety of needs. For example, if you have someone who has a visual impairment, and it's tough for them, or they're colorblind and they can't necessarily differentiate the colors of the blocks, you don't need to do colors, you can do different shapes, and you can still do a code that way. So we use this example, and we show you this example because it really can be adjusted in multiple ways, in a lot of different ways.
I'm just thinking too, if you're doing a sequence, the idea with the sequence, it might be that they are more kinesthetic learners and maybe doing claps, jumps, whatever.
Well, yeah, hopefully, and but it all depends because you could have students, who, academically, I had students, for example, who, not so great in reading and writing, but then you give them a task like this, and it's, they can do so much, and then, you get the opposite as well.
Right, well, that was one practical example. Maybe we'll bring in that universal learning design and design for learning.
So really, what a lot of what we're talking about today. A way to approach your lesson planning, and this is actually more of a whole group lesson planning, but it's called universal design, and it's more specifically universal design for learning, which is instead of we have the environment or we have the curriculum and now we're going to adjust it, we're going to adjust my lesson plan to go and meet the needs of the student, is no, I'm going to design the lesson plan from the start to be accessible to a wider variety of students. And so that's universal design for learning, is that in your lesson, you're actually planning for that the students can do the task and demonstrate the learning in a variety of ways. And so how UDL works is it categorizes your planning into 3 categories: multiple means of representation, multiple means of expression, and multiple means of engagement. So in these 3 principles, Representation is sort of the what of learning. How are you, the teacher, going to provide for the students, and how are they going to access what they need to know in order to do the task or to understand the lesson? So a great example of this is, you might directly instruct them in front of the class, but you might also use the whiteboard and, write notes or instructions on the whiteboard as well. That's multiple methods. You might then go and sit with one or two of them and do one-on-one. You may explain a concept and then you may show a YouTube video. Ultimately, it is about providing the same content in a variety of different ways. So for example, if I have a student who, again, visually impaired or needs additional support, if I am writing anything on the board, I may actually already have a handout for them, because I don't want them also trying to copy down and trying to listen to me. They can't do two things at once. That's complicated for them. So that is, again, having in my lesson design that I can already have accommodations and adjustments ready in the lesson that I'm planning.
Yeah.
Multiple means of expression is more about how the students are going to do the learning and how are they going to demonstrate their understanding and demonstrate their knowledge. And so this can be, this really, I think, is where you bring in the skills and the abilities of the student or students and what they like to do. So for example, if one of the things that I teach a lot of literacy and I teach a lot of storytelling. Now, if I do storytelling, I'd be great to, write me a creative story, one paragraph, beginning, middle, end. And I could have a student who is very capable of writing that paragraph, in great sentences and great grammar. I may have a student who actually needs a visual handout that has, beginning, middle, end, sort of, laid out visually so that they know how to section their writing. Or I may have students who grammar, writing, they can't do.
Yep.
And so instead, what I would actually have them do is to do a storyboard and actually draw it out. And then if that even is a struggle for them, maybe I would get them a pile of pictures, and then they choose pictures to tell a story.
Sequencing.
So that is a great example of I am planning on different ways that these students can demonstrate their ability to tell me a story. Because again, that's what I'm testing, how to tell a story. Or how to sequence ideas.
Yeah.
I'm not testing them on their handwriting or their drawing skills or these other skills. I'm testing them on their sequencing. And then third, multiple means of engagement, the why of learning. Again, getting into the personalization of, well, how can we make it more interesting to them? How can we make it more engaging to them? Because when it comes to learning, the basic premise of learning is we take an idea or a concept and we relate it to something that we already know. And whether we accept or reject the idea, or if it's a brand new idea, or if it's something that we accept as, okay, that's just part of what we already know. Learning always comes back to something that we already know. And so means of engagement is to really, when you're creating these lesson plans, to try to frame it in examples that the students already know. If the students love, Ben 10 or My Little Pony or Pokemon or whatever, put it in terms of them. Part of the reason for that, and I could talk all day with this, so I won't, but part of the reason for that is I teach storytelling using video games, partly because when they see the video game, it helps them that they don't need to worry. It sort of saves them that cognitive energy of worrying about some of those factors, and they can just worry about what I'm trying to teach them. But multiple means of engagement means that allowing them to sort of do it. If they're telling a story, how about they tell a story about something they like, something that interests them. And this is, this looks a bit daunting initially, but this is something I really like and really want you to take away with. In fact, on your own time, you can watch this YouTube video about sort of these 9 tips, is what I call them, for how to take your lesson planning and how to make sure you can adjust it and differentiate it for a wide abilities. Including recruiting interest. How do you sustain the effort? How do you get them to self-regulate? That's something.
I think some of those questions were the challenges that people mentioned.
Exactly. And so this idea of universal design for learning is this idea that we're actually, it's not just here's this worksheet, do this worksheet, and that's what I want. It's, well, we're going to allow you to demonstrate your knowledge in your own way, and we're going to give you different it's okay that you don't have to do exactly what I want. You can sort of make it in your own way too. Make it a part of yourself.
Excellent.
And so again, when it comes to, how do I, do this UDL, again, it all comes back to number one, goal setting. It all comes back to the curriculum. What am I, expected to teach? What do I want to teach? What should I be teaching given the additional needs of student or students? And then, so for example, you might have a class where, yes, it is very hard for many of them to get attention, or to keep attention or to be engaged. Or you might have a class where, many of them are hearing impaired. And you have to think about, so, what is the group I have in front of me, and how can I then create a lesson that meets most of their needs? I mean, it's going to be rare. It's going to take a lot of time to design one that's used 100%. But the idea is, can I at least meet 80% of their needs? So that student that I know is going to be like, oh, why am I learning about this? Then you can say, well, actually, you can make it about this thing that you like, And part of that is, when it says, consider your different students, consider, how all the different things that they may need to learn, whether it is the videos, whether they need handouts, whether they need additional instruction, one-on-one. And then you're going to think about, yes, how can then I assess them? How can I, prove that, they learned something, that they understood the lesson? And that may be that they do it on, I had a student, just did not like the handouts or worksheets or writing, but loved PowerPoint, loved making PowerPoint presentations. And so I would then have them, as part of their assessment, they would do their work on PowerPoint, and it worked and engaged them. Why? Because they felt comfortable with that. Whereas they had stigmas or really anxiety over writing and handwriting or using worksheets. And so I think you'll find is when you sort of let them have a bit of freedom, I think one of the best things about increasing engagement and motivation is just giving choice. And so it'll all, of course, number 4, be dependent on, what you have in front of you. If you don't have access to laptops, or if you don't, you have limited materials, well, it's going to depend on your environment. But the point is to at least try to go and to give the students choice, and provide that choice that meets at least, ideally at least 80% of, the students you have in front of you. And then, of course, after you do that, reflect on it, and did it work? What didn't? Because, of course, we're all pressed for time, and this UDL stuff does take time, to implement and to do your lesson planning. But overall, I think it's a really great framework for actually being able to just stop and think about, okay, how can I open up my lesson plan instead of being so rigid? How can I open it up to allow for a bit more variation, allow for, greater expression and, greater representation?
And I noticed when we did some work on, I think we've got 5 or so lessons on the DT Hub. The outcome of those lessons now are that they're a lot better for all students, aren't they, in terms of
exactly
how to unpack that.
And so this doesn't have to be for severe disabilities, or this doesn't have to be for a variety. This can just be for your classroom of year 7 students. So for those who are really struggling with motivation or engagement, it's like, well, at least give them the choice. Because again, when in my teaching career, it's like if they say, oh, they don't want to do this. Well, if you at least give them do A or do B, that at least they feel a bit of ownership, and they feel a bit of listening and control in that process.
Because we did a change on one of the network related year 7 tasks, and that's it's a really good idea where you come.
Yeah, so this is a great example of how on the surface it seems like, okay, this this makes sense and I understand this, but then when you think about it in terms of, well, this is actually quite an abstract idea. Yes, we as teachers are, we sort of understand these concepts, but for somebody who struggles with abstract concepts and needs much more concrete examples, how can we take something like this example, which is computers? What is a network? What is a computer network, and how does data get transmitted? When we think, aha, I know, I got the perfect plan. I'm going to use the Sydney Trains network. This is going to be great. I'm going to use the Melbourne Trains network. And then you realize, well, actually, no, I can actually adjust it further. There may be other ways to even take this and make it much more concrete. So first is multiple needs of representation, the what of learning. What am I actually trying to do? And I'm not testing them on, do they know the train stops or the stations? I'm actually testing them on, can they at least explain in their own words about what is a network and how do we share information in that network? And then number 2, multiple means of expression. How am I going to actually how am I going to get them to demonstrate that knowledge? And again, you can do maps, you can do, you can do network diagrams if you want, but here in number 3 is really what we said where, well, what about for the students who are going to be struggling a bit more? And so here's where I know, why don't we give them a few different ways that they can start engaging with this lesson? Because some of them, even the train network example, may be a bit, you know? And so when it comes down to it, what are we really talking about? We're talking about people or places that we can get to give information to. And it can be as simple as, you know, getting back to, well, what does the student know? Every student knows a school. Every student knows that there's a principal or there's a receptionist. And it's like, hey, you know what? How about, you know, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to write a note. And note, that's data, that's information. You give it to the principal. And the hallways are a train network. You know, the hallways are, you know, the Cat5 cabling, you know. And so when it comes to, okay, well, I'm really struggling with the student, that they're just struggling with these abstract concepts, bring it back to what do they know? And you use the school, use role playing, you know, so students like role playing in the sense of, look, sending even a note to the office, that is networks. And so first you're teaching them about doing it at school, and then you're just changing the words. Imagine that note is now data. Imagine the hallway, the hallway is, you know, the network path. Imagine, you know, the principal's office is the node, you know, the receptionist is the router, you know. And so again, that's getting back to what do the students already know, and they're going to learn based upon what they already know.
And I'm pretty sure that there'd be a lot of students in that class, if you ran that, would understand networking a lot better.
Exactly.
Than,
and again, for that students like, oh, school, that's so boring. It's like, okay, well, how about your town? How about, you know, use examples that they know.
Expand it further.
Exactly.
That's a great example, that one.
Now, another approach that I like when thinking about, okay, how am I going to adjust, you know, and plan my lessons for this, you know, wide variety of students? There's a couple of them, and this is sort of the first one, which is using what's called a planning pyramid, where you separate out your planning into 3 categories. Okay, what should the students, what do they must know? What is essential? What should they know in this lesson? And what could they know? Okay, and it's much better to look at it in terms of this planning pyramid diagram, which is that when you approach a lesson, you're trying to think, okay, what do I want all my students to get out of this lesson, okay? And it could just be basic vocabulary, basic concepts. You just might be teaching them, this is what a node is. This is what a network is, you know? You don't have to pack much stuff into number 1 if you think for some, you know, at the very least, I want all of them to at least know that. Keeping in mind, and I'm going to address this afterwards, keeping in mind that some students may already know that. So you're putting stuff in the bottom of the pyramid that they already know, but we'll get to that. So you're actually dividing your lesson to, okay, by the end of the lesson, what should all students know? And then from that, okay, well then what should most students know? You know, hopefully we get most students to the next point where they're going into deeper into the concepts. Maybe they're looking at examples. Maybe they're doing, they're doing something creative, or they're generating their own new knowledge. And then the top is, really that, okay, we got those few who just race through it. They're already done. Now they're so bored because they're too smart, and now, what are we going to have them do? Well, then now that's that extra little thing, that really tough concept, or that really high level thinking of that activity for them to do. And I really look at this as, number 1, that bottom level is really my initial lesson plan. And then I have 2 and 3 sort of as my extension activities, knowing most of the students are going to get to level 2. And then a couple of them, if they finish early, they're going to get to level 3. And so, what I do for this is, generally when I'm teaching, because I will generally be needed mostly with students who are going to struggle with the level 1, is that then I have worksheets or I have activities ready to go, so that when whoever finished level 1, I give them, this is now level 2. Right. And then, when they finish level 2 and they're bored, I say, okay, here's level 3. I sort of have that ready to go. I don't at the start of the lesson necessarily go through all 3 levels. I may quickly mention it, but if I have a student who has, who's operating at, at the must-know level, and they have anxiety or they're struggling, last thing I want to do is to do this whole, this is what we're doing today, and then say, oh, but it's okay if you only do one. I instead just have the extension activities sort of ready to go. But I've used the term levels because how I've sort of taken this planning pyramid is I've sort of taken it and adapted it to a different way, where planning lessons that, if I have a student who already knows the basic stuff in that bottom level of that pyramid, well, they don't necessarily have to start there. But you still need to know those basic concepts. So I don't want to not put it there in my lesson. You need to know, but if you already know, this is where I use this term called levels, and sort of like video game levels, where in my lesson I have, let's say, 3 levels, and students can sort of start at any level they want. Now, hopefully, you don't have every student starting on level 3 because you're running, hopefully, otherwise they may run out of things to do.
Do you sort of say, well, handpick some of the students, say level 1, throw some of those ideas to them?
Well, how I would start it, and again, this all goes back to knowing your students, is I design my lessons so that everybody starts on level 1, and they just, if they're really capable of that, they just sort of fly through that activity and move on to level 2. Really, you have them start at level 2 or level 3 if you need to, only if they look at level 1 and then, oh, this is too easy, or they're giving you a bit of grief. Most students will be happy to do level 1 and just do it and then move on to the next thing. So what I have is I sort of say that, as you know your students, and as the end of the topic, you can sort of say, hey, why don't you start on level 2? But it really needs to be at a point where they can do it mostly independently. You don't want to give them something too hard and then they're calling you over every 5 minutes. Certainly the way I start it is that everybody starts on level 1, and only when you get really used to the student, do you feel confident to say, okay, I'll tell you what, you're right, And so with this levels thing is, I have this example, it's called Fairy Tale Fun. This is from the Digital Technologies Hub. We're gonna go to that website now because I'm gonna show you how we took this lesson plan, which is a very good lesson plan, and on its own, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But we've then added these levels to it so that for the students, you're like, okay, well, for 80% of the students, sure, they can do this lesson in the 5 steps. But for some of them, I think we're going to need to make some adjustments. And what they can then do is to go and actually, you can give them these levels. And again, by writing it out in these levels also means that I can then go and print them out and bam, there's their worksheet. So sort of my lesson plan also becomes their worksheet.
So just to let you know, we have got 5 lessons on their handout. So if they want to have a look at some of these, but we'll just talk through one.
Yeah, we'll just talk through this one, yes. So this is an example of, again, sequencing. It's sorting pictures that are related to a story. I mean, for example, Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, but it doesn't have to be. And that the idea is that a student chooses a bunch of pictures, and then mixes them all up, and then another peer has to go and try and put them in order to work out the story. And again, you start with a story they already know, and then you can extend it to other great things.
I'll just open the PowerPoint. So
oh, great, yeah.
What
and one of the skills besides sorting is for students to use PowerPoint, and one of the goals is them to learn the slide sorter view.
So this is where they're all out of order.
And so again, it's important to know that the goal of this lesson is not about, it is about storytelling, but it's about sequencing, and it's about using PowerPoint for a purpose. It's not about their pictures or their visualizations or their grammar. And so this is sort of an example they can already use, and then they can already try. Now, what then with these levels approach that that you could do is, well, okay, they're doing this, but for example, what if they're struggling with the computer, the mouse? For some students, they can't use a mouse. But maybe, or you don't have access to computers, so then maybe you can print them out, or maybe that they could cut them out. And again, you as a teacher can print out the slides, and then they do the slides sort of together. Now, again, the goal of the lesson was that they were to use PowerPoint, so you are adjusting the lesson, but you are still meeting some of the goals of the curriculum. And then, again, you know, with the pictures or the printouts, you can then say, okay, if they're able to do that, then they can maybe perhaps move on and start their own and use their own pictures. But you may want to give them a structure of, you know, beginning, middle, end.
Sure. Yeah.
Or you may want to give them, you know, a second PowerPoint that you've created that has a structure to it. You may want to partner them with somebody who, you know, can help them with some of the more PowerPoint stuff. But the idea that, you know, some students, you know, you give them, hey, look at this PowerPoint, reorder the slides, they're going to go in 3 seconds, they're going to be done, and they're almost going to be frustrated that it was too easy.
Yes.
And, you know, suddenly they, oh, okay, I did it, and now I have an excuse to go and look at the internet or something.
Yeah.
So you don't want that. So you say, no, you go right to level 2 where you have to start finding your own, you know? Because again, for some students, you don't want them to do the easiest thing because that's actually a potential way to derail the lesson.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you can then, of course, extend that, you know, where you have that they go and make up a short story. And, you know, if they can't find pictures, maybe they can draw pictures, you know?
Yeah. So there's quite a bit of extent there across that list.
There's a huge, and these are just, and I know I haven't covered everything. We're just throwing out a few examples. It really depends on the students in front of you, what their needs are, what their interests are. Again, you know, they may say, oh, I hate Goldilocks and Three Bears. So I'll say, okay, I'll tell you what, fine. You go find pictures of your favorite, you know, movie or story or whatever, you know. And then that at least motivates them. Okay, fine. I'll put, you know, if they really like, you know, I have a student who loves the Shrek movies. Okay, put the Shrek movie in, but then mix it up and see if your pal can go and put them back in order. So,
Okay, excellent. Yeah.
so yeah. So just sort of start sort of finishing up and wrapping up this. You know, when making adjustments, again, you do have to know the curriculum. You have to know the curriculum both at the year level that the student is biologically at, as well as the academic level that the student are at. And the adjustments you can make, again, don't be afraid. It doesn't, even though it's digital technologies, you don't have to always use ICT stuff, you know? That's fine if they want to do drawings. That's fine if they want to do Lego or Unifix blocks, or if they want to do, you know, and then again, for a lot of these students, the physical component is actually much more tangible than what's on the screen. And again, these lessons, you know, I like the levels because you can make these adjustments while it's happening. You know, if level 1 doesn't really work, well, then you have options again. You have that flexibility. And again, part of that flexibility comes in when you design UDL and you have planning for, you know, I can have them do it on the PowerPoint, I can have them do it on a piece of paper, I can have them do it on the whiteboard. Yep. You know that, okay, if they're suddenly starting to get stressed and struggling with the PowerPoint, you say, okay, that's fine, don't worry. I said you could also do it on the paper. And then it's like, oh, okay, whew, you know. So, you know, you're also sort of, you're planning ahead and you're having, you know, you're sort of, you got the answer right away for when the child doesn't want to do it or says they can't do it, or, you know, it's too easy or too hard.
Excellent. So a bit of a summary.
Yeah. Well, again, it just comes back to knowing your students, knowing their abilities, knowing what they can do. Again, you know, if they're really good at PowerPoint, or if they're really good at drawing, or if they're really good at something that really interests them, then try to use that in the lesson. Because again, it is about, you know, you're not necessarily, you know, teaching them or testing them on, oh, how do I, you know, what's their grammar, or what's, you know, their storytelling, or what story they chose. It's just about, no, are they sequencing, or are they sorting? And so knowing those things about the curriculum and how to adjust it, both, you know, for how can I do it for the class, and then how can I do it for some individual students who may need extra needs. But certainly consider, you know, the individual student, this cohort as a group, what the learner wants, what their interests are, and then you as a teacher of, you know, well, what can you realistically do? If you don't have access to the computer or iPads, you know, you can only do so much. Yeah. And then, of course, as you're going through this, always be adjusting, always be looking at and getting their feedback of, hey, is this working? Is this not? If not, how do I change it for next time?
Excellent. Yeah. So we might open some questions, but we might just also talk about, let people know that we are working on part of the website, which is providing some guidance for state and territories focused, but also a bit about the design, the framework, user design for learning. that'll be on there.
So we're actually coming up with a dedicated section, which will be there. It's called Inclusive Education, which has a lot of the things we've already incorporated into this webinar, as well as links to lessons that we are already creating and modifying to give you even more examples of how to take some of these already great lessons that are on the website and even expand them to meet a range of abilities.
So that work's being done at the moment. So
Soon.
Yeah, soon that'll come out. So again, if you wanted to just take those lessons that we've got on the handout as a bit of a guide to see how the how that framework operates, and then you might be able to adjust your own lessons that you have for planning. So, and
certainly do provide us feedback. Let us know. So, hey, I tried this, it did work. Tried this, it didn't work. Or, hey, I tried this lesson and this worked really great, and I think others may want to know. So. Definitely do share.
I think Natasha's just had a question, and if the students are struggling with digital technology and cannot write any programs, is it okay for them to draw and write?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Again, it all comes back to what are you assessing. Now, again, if it's we're trying to get them to use the slides sort of function, but look at it in terms of what is going to be most beneficial for them as a student. In other words, I have some students that it's more important for them to have a good day at school and to not get into a fight or to not get anxiety or not have a meltdown than it is for them to know how to do the slide sort of functionality on PowerPoint. And so it will be about instead working with, okay, can I get them to draw the story? And then they'll draw it on 7 pieces of paper, and then we can mix it up and see if somebody can put that story together. So yes, absolutely, it is perfectly okay. And again, it is all about meeting the needs. And hey, sometimes the needs of the student is that, no, they are calm and relaxed when they draw, and when you put them on a computer, it just chaos ensues and stuff gets thrown, Yeah. So.
Well, thanks, Clark, for sharing all your knowledge and the ideas. And as Clark mentioned, we're going through the process. I think we're probably going to update about 40 different
tons.
So.
It's gonna be over the next few months. Yeah. But if there's any suggestions or anything in particular that you want to see or want to know more about or technologies, please do let us know.
Yeah. And after this webinar, you've got a chance to provide some feedback for us. So if there's anything else you wanted, we can ask Clark to provide those answers. So thanks, Clark. And
no, thank you very much.
Sign off, and thanks everyone for watching. And next webinar, we've got it on assessment, so that should be really interesting as well. Rebecca Vivian from the CSCR group will be providing that expertise. So until then, we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Great.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.